You are listening to the Love Makes a Way podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Hoffman, founder and president of Life Options Network. On this podcast, we will discuss overcoming through Christ and how we as the church can create a culture of life. I look forward to having you with me today. To Love Makes a Way. I am so grateful for this special guest here. Stefanie Overstreet is with us today, you guys, and she is a registered nurse and nutritional therapy practitioner who supports postpartum moms through the PEACE method. She has two daughters, Brielle and Jubilee, with her husband, Chris. And so we are so excited to have you. Thank you for being here, Stefanie.
Thank you for having me, Jennifer. I'm excited to have this conversation and connect and support more moms.
Yes, it's a really big part of our heart at Life Options Network to highlight the needs of mothers while also highlighting the reality of abortion. And so we want to just have this conversation. I don't know if you know my story, but I had severe postpartum depression. It actually almost took my life. So when I saw your program, it actually made me a little bit emotional in a good way, because I thought, oh, that is so needed. And people they need to understand just the depth of reality that women are facing while they choose life. We want women to choose life, and we will always validate that. But we also want to give them the tools they need for success so that as mothers, they're feeling empowered and they're feeling seen and heard, especially in the U.S. and church culture and all of these things. So, I'm so curious, what made you interested in postpartum care?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, when I graduated nursing school, I specialized in pediatrics. And I worked in a hospital in a smaller town, so I was able to cross-train into postpartum, so taking care of a brand new mom, brand new baby and mama right after birth. And so I did that for a number of years in the hospital setting, but I was not a mom yet myself. So I would do all the education, and when I'd send them home, here's what to look for, here's what to do. But I really had no idea what a big transition postpartum is for a woman. So when I became a mom myself, I thought that I kind of had it all figured out. I mean, it's like I've taken care of lots of babies. I know all there is to know about this topic. And I was really blindsided by postpartum depression and anxiety myself.
Wow.
I had a severe case too. So when you mentioned that, my heart was like, oh, I know exactly how that feels. Yeah. And I just, from the time of birth, immediately just did not feel like myself. I had mood swings, lots of irrational fears, difficulty sleeping, almost like hypervigilance, like just so much concern about my baby and the well-being of my baby, and were they eating enough, and all of the different things. And I didn't recognize myself. And it was such a bizarre, it was the last thing I expected, because when we think of having a baby, it's supposed to be the happiest time in your life,
Right.
And so I ended up going on a journey of pursuing healing, and I really struggled with being a Christian and having anxiety and depression as a new mom. Yeah. I just was like, we're not supposed to be like this. Like, what am I supposed to do? And this was almost 9 years ago. So I did try and spend some time on the internet and tried to look for resources, and I just really could not find anything, especially in reference to this topic for Christian women. There was one Bible teacher that I knew of that mentioned that she had it and she had survived it. So I was like, I know there's other people out there, but Instagram didn't have all of the support that it has now on there. It's easy to find things on there now, but it took me a long time to heal. And it took a combination of addressing things going on in my body. It took some counseling. It took a lot of learning how to deal with emotions and thought processes, and and building relationships, and also just I think a huge process that had to happen on the inside. It felt a little bit like an identity
Mhm.
crisis for me. And
Right.
I'd had a great relationship with God my entire life, but when I was going through this season, I felt like I questioned myself. I questioned, like, am I not as strong of a Christian as I thought I was because I'm struggling? I felt all of this
Yeah.
shame, and, maybe I'm not a good mom, I'm failing. And so it really was like an unwinding of all these different beliefs and
Mhm.
hurts and wounds that had taken place during that time. And eventually I did recover. And when I recovered, it was around 14 months postpartum. So I just white knuckled it and hung on for 14 months. And then when I started to get some support. Actually, what's really interesting is
Hmm.
I volunteered at a faith-based pregnancy center and in our
Awesome.
town, and I was one of the nurses that would meet with the different women that would come and offer them a pregnancy test and talk with them about support options. And we had someone from the county come in and talk to us about postpartum depression and anxiety, and there was a program through the county that you could refer women to who were struggling. And so I was back and forth because I would have good days and then I would have hard days. And I just wasn't sure, like, do I really have this or not? I don't know. But I finally went to the place where I volunteered, and I went to my director and just said, I'm not doing good. I think I need help, and it just took a
Wow.
lot of vulnerability to do that. And I was
Mhm.
able to participate in that program and get some free counseling. So I always try and recommend to women to find out what the resources are in their local area, because sometimes there can be a county program. But I, along that journey, by the time I started to really feel better after I stopped breastfeeding around 14 months, my hormones stabilized. And it was like suddenly I felt like myself again. It was like the
Mhm.
clouds parted and the sun came back out. And it was like, oh, I'm me
I love
again,
that.
And it almost took that
Yeah.
experience for me to realize that I hadn't been myself all of those months prior, because I'd never experienced anything like that before. So I really just had
Mhm.
nothing to compare it to. But once I felt like myself again, then I was really like, okay, there was definitely something going on here related to postpartum and things in my body, because this was just not me. And so that was when I started to realize, like, I really feel like it was a lack of knowledge, even as a nurse. This is what blows me away. I was a nurse with a background in that area, and
Mhm.
I didn't really recognize what was going on or know what to do about it. And I just think
Right.
about the average woman that just, how is she supposed to know? How is she supposed
What
to
to do.
recognize when she's not
Mm.
doing well during her postpartum season? And how is she supposed to know where to turn if I hardly
Absolutely.
knew?
Right.
And I also realized that postpartum itself is a very vulnerable season, which we'll talk about in a minute. But I realized that I feel like the enemy just kind of got in there and exploited my vulnerabilities. I feel like
Mm.
there was just
Yes.
this vulnerable time and all of these questions and things that I wasn't sure about. And then kind of came this onslaught of fear and shame and lies. And honestly,
Yeah.
I didn't recognize a lot of it at first because I
Yeah.
just was so unprepared for everything
Yeah.
that I was dealing with. But I kind of had this righteous anger rise up in me after that, where I realized I don't want anyone else to suffer the way I did. I can't
Yeah.
just stay silent about what I went through. I have to speak up. I have to make a difference. I have to do something about this. And the last thing I'll say is that my husband told me at that time, he said, just be the voice that you wish you would have had.
Yep.
Just start there. And so that's
Mhm.
actually what got me into doing the postpartum work that I do now, and why I went back and became a nutritional therapy practitioner, so I could offer an additional level of skill set and support to
So
postpartum women,
awesome.
because it was like, women should not have to suffer like this. There
Mm-mm.
are so many solutions, but sometimes it's just hard to weed through everything. You almost
So
need
true.
someone that kind of has their finger on the pulse of that season in life
Yes.
and is a bit of an expert. So that's really what led me to focus on that was my own journey. And actually, I have seen there's something so rewarding about watching God take the ashes and the brokenness that you walk through, and He uses that story to bring life and healing and hope and transformation
So
for
true.
other moms. And I just would not trade that for anything.
It's amazing. Wow. Yeah, that is everything you said is just so relevant to what my experience was as
Hmm.
well. I had gotten so bad, and there was a lot of shame. That word was so
Hmm.
heavy because it was so a part of my journey. I was a leader in the church at the time. I probably was dealing with even comparing myself to other moms at the time.
Hmm.
Just wasn't super confident going into motherhood. There wasn't a lot of friends of mine who had had a baby who really I could glean from. So here I am going first among my peers in, that I was close to having this child. And I just remember the hopelessness of I have no one to talk to about this. And then it just got worse and worse and worse. And so it was about 8 months into, my
Hmm.
daughter being alive that I realized something is very, very wrong. Ended up
Hmm.
actually having to move out of our home into my parents' home so that my mother could care for me, and my dad
Hmm.
too, and the baby. And so when you've been through that journey, you look at the beginning of it. And I had also, just to kind of clarify why I believe that experience was so crazy, was I had really dealt with a botched C-section as well, so I'm dealing with
Hmm.
physical pain. And then there was some other just external things happening, just with familial stuff that we were kind of just facing, and so it was the perfect storm. And
Yes.
the enemy comes in like a flood when he wants to take us out, and he wants to ensure that we don't have the future that we really God has placed in our lives to have, and that plan and hope. And I always look at that season as one where I got to see what it was to sit with Jesus in the worst position ever. And I think any sense of pride that I had in my ability to overcome on my own was really destroyed in that moment, because there had to be a reliance on Jesus. We had
Yeah.
a few pastors who I dearly love, but they didn't have the pulse, right? They didn't totally understand
Hmm.
what I was facing, and there just wasn't the cultural conversation. So this was 14 years ago now.
Yeah.
To to even talk about it. Some people were even wondering if it was a reality, and so you're trying to
Hmm.
navigate something that just maybe culturally wasn't a thing. But praise the Lord,
Mhm.
he there was a time where he healed me and delivered me from all of that. So praise God for his faithfulness and all of that. So if you are going through that, there is hope. God does show up when you ask him to. And Stephanie is an amazing resource as well. But so what do you believe women who are becoming first times moms should know regarding having a baby and caring for themselves? If there was one thing that you would put out to any new mom right now?
Yeah. I would say if if you're hearing this and you're still pregnant, I would take the opportunity to do some preparation and some planning for postpartum because that is just a little known thing. And we
Yeah.
plan so much for our birth. We decorate our nursery. We get our
Yes.
stroller and car seat combination.
So true.
We have all of the things. And it's like we have no idea what's coming. And that's not meant to sound negative or fear inducing. But the
Right.
reason I say that is because the thing I want new moms to know is that giving birth and the postpartum season are two of the biggest transitions a woman goes through in her lifetime. And
Yeah.
in this case, the transitions are back to back, right? They're happening
Mhm.
one after the next. So it would make sense that that season postpartum would be so vulnerable. And I just think sometimes we just don't know, especially as first time moms. We don't have a
Right.
context for like, this is a huge change in my body, my thoughts, my emotions, my relationship with God, my relationship with my husband, all of those things change, even how we show up at work or our hobbies, the thing, like kind of the purpose that we have.
Yeah.
It's all affected by this big transition. And that's not, doesn't have to be a bad thing, but it's helpful to kind of have this understanding. Oh, I'm going through a huge change and I'm kind of a unique creature for about 2 years. I'm
Right.
in this
Right.
unique season for about 2 years after I have a baby where my needs are different, where my environment needs to be different, where I need permission to do life differently. And I think a lot of this starts with recognizing that and how we treat ourselves. Because a lot of
Mhm.
times we just don't realize, people told me have grace for yourself. I didn't know what that meant.
Right.
I saw other moms that would have a baby and go back to life as if nothing happened, nothing
Yeah.
changed. You feel like that's just what you're supposed
Mhm.
to do. And so I think my biggest encouragement for first time moms would be to prepare if you can, but otherwise to recognize what a unique season that is and to give yourself the gift of support one way or
Yes.
another. That can look like a lot of things depending on who you are, your circumstances, your needs, but not forgetting that, there's someone that says, we focus so much on, is the baby eating enough? Is the baby sleeping enough? Is the baby crying too much? But there's very little question of, is mom eating enough? Is mom sleeping enough?
Sure.
Is mom
Exactly.
crying too much? And
Yeah.
I think culturally we're trying to change that, but there is kind
Mhm.
of, it does start with giving mom permission to
Yeah.
um, make room for support and evaluating how she's doing.
So good. So good. And in the in the pro-life work we do and in the motherhood support work we do, one of the things I've always recognized when I've studied each angle the enemy has used to get women into the abortion clinic, it was
Mm,
always everything. And the idea that women just need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and jump back
yeah.
into a full-time career. And again, if you're a full-time career person, so am I love it, let's do it. But in American culture, the child has become, um, kind of a nuisance, and the mother has
Mhm,
become a business person, I guess, in the
mhm,
eyes of culture. And so we have this idea in many cases that that's the dream. Or the reality, and so because of that, I believe, and I don't know if you agree with this, but that there is this pressure on women to keep going in the midst of all that they're trying to achieve, and that the achievement can be in sometimes just their kids, and that's an okay thing. If that's what the Lord has called you to, that is a high role. That's an important role, and in society it's really become secondary. But what would your thoughts be on that, just culturally? What would be the
mhm.
shifts you would love to see?
Yeah, well, for one thing, I would love to see much more support in terms of family leave, or
Yes.
women being able. I have worked part time for many years, so I can't
Hmm.
say that I have really had to face that situation of trying to figure out how to take leave. But from what I understand, there's not a lot of that. And in other countries, it's much more supported. And I believe, I don't want to misquote things, but I feel
Sure.
like I've heard in some countries there's like even up to a year or 2 years
Hmm.
of support and special allowance for
Yes.
moms after they have a baby. And I wish so much culturally that we could see that. And then I think you're right. I think um, shifting the values, because I do think it's easy to devalue children, and motherhood in itself can be
Hmm.
a very like invisible role. Like you
Yes.
can spend all day taking care of your kids and your home, and the end of the day comes and it's like, what did I have to show for it? Like
Right.
my kids are
Right.
alive, but it
Sure.
doesn't. I sometimes let my husband. I'm blessed that my husband, we're basically on one income. for many years, but my husband would come home from work and I would be like, I know it doesn't look like I did anything, but I promise I did. Not that he
Absolutely.
had an
Yeah.
expectation of
Of
me,
course.
but
Yeah.
I did, it
Right.
was like, okay.
Yes.
So yes, I think there is kind of an internal work that as mothers that we can do. But yes, culture and honestly valuing and giving a voice to those kinds of things, because then it's like
Yes.
we can collectively change the culture amongst one
Yes.
another. But honestly, part of what comes to mind is I think about the moms, like especially the ones that may come to Life Options Network for support. And you just think about these moms that they don't have a husband that's supporting
Yeah.
them so they can stay home. And maybe they have to work or they're just trying to survive. And I mean, it's heartbreaking because I know how challenging that transition to motherhood and the years of having little ones is very demanding in all of the ways
Yes.
because they are
Yep.
reliant on you to keep them alive. They can't
Yes.
feed themselves, dress themselves. They're very dependent for the first even 3 years. And
Hmm.
think about how much sleep deprivation moms go through with the children in their
Absolutely.
early years. And so I feel for women that don't have, a spouse or that type of support that are doing it on their own. And I think that is
Absolutely.
where I just, it's like we want women to keep their babies when they have an unplanned pregnancy, and yet the support, the need for a well-rounded support system is so great in order
Yes.
for them to do that. So I love what you guys are doing, but I definitely like feel this, culturally speaking. Like in fact, one of the mamas that I had in my mentorship program recently, she um had recently become a single mom. And so part of what we were talking about is like you cannot do this on your own. So,
Yeah.
like, ask friends to come watch your baby once a week so that you can have 2 hours to yourself, or like, how can we set this up for you so that you're not doing it on your own? So, I think having an awareness, culturally speaking, if we could kind of have an awareness of those people around us that are in those kind of
Yes.
situations, or maybe it's the mama that has 4 kids under 4 years old, like
Yeah.
we should be checking on them.
Right. Oh my goodness. Yes. I mean, that's so many yeses to all of that. I look at just some I've walked with a few single moms and I've
Mm,
seen their journey and it's very, very hard. And one of the things that I feel called to do in the ministry we're doing is to help bring some legs to that support system to moms
mhm,
in the church and out of the church,
mhm,
because it's a direct assault to the lie of the abortion industry that says that you are not capable. Now, I think we should fully acknowledge the challenge mothers face, but I also think we as the church need to rise up and, like you were just saying, call that mom who's struggling, especially if she's a single mom, especially if she doesn't have the resources and you know that she's in that position. Our deep love and care for her is ultimately going to speak to not only that first child that chooses life, but that second or third child, because we know
mhm,
that culturally women actively abort as mothers more than any other demographic. And so, if we
mhm.
understand that, we need to begin to build systems of support. I liken it to God the Father.
Yeah.
Being able to be represented through the church in the hands and feet of those who love the Lord,
Mhm,
bringing that long term support,
mhm.
and it has to be fierce. It has to be fierce. It can't be a one off situation. It has to be. Listen, we're losing over 2,000, 2,400 babies a day to the abortion industry, which loves to come after women in these circumstances. So, how can we better that? And so that's why I love your program and what you're doing,
Mhm.
because it is adding to the support system that women need, and bringing the love of Jesus into their lives. It's so
Yeah,
powerful.
so true. Thank
So
you.
amazing. Absolutely. No, I think it's amazing. Um, so your husband is Chris Overstreet. He is a powerful evangelist. I know you guys work together in that as well with Compassion to Action, and I just appreciate all he has done as well to bring evangelism into America.
Mhm.
But he's also a father and a husband, and so talk to us about what your experience is and how you feel husbands can support their wives when they're facing this situation of postpartum depression.
Yeah, I would say my poor husband just had no idea what to do with me. And I
Mine
remember
either. It's okay. Yeah.
I know, and he talked to
Yeah.
a friend of his whose wife had gone through that, had gone through postpartum depression and anxiety, and so he came back to me and was like, "So and so's wife went through this, and she got on medication and it was just a chemical imbalance." And I remember like yelling at him like, "I don't have a chemical imbalance." And so I would just say I think for
Yeah.
husbands it is very hard to talk about it and to kind of address it because you
Sure.
never know kind of what response you're going to get. But I would say we can always start with compassion, with validation and
Yes.
encouragement. So, validation looks like, I see how hard this is. I see that
Yeah.
you're working hard.
So
I
good.
see that it seems like you don't feel like yourself. I think that is a very non-threatening way to kind of bring it up is it seems like you might not feel like yourself. Like
Yeah.
how are things going for you? Just opening up
Mhm.
the conversation and letting her talk. And I think for a lot of women, it's a process sometimes of coming to grips with, I'm not doing okay. And so if she's
Right.
not receptive at first, that doesn't mean that we don't um, revisit that in different ways. But I think encouragement is also really good. And I think asking how can I help? Sometimes that works. Other
Yes.
times it's like she's not going to have an answer. So
Right.
in that case, looking for the very practical things. So we have to think of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where at the bottom of
Mhm.
the pyramid, at the top of the pyramid is like fulfillment and like walking in your purpose and all these things. But at the very bottom of the pyramid is our most basic needs. So,
Mhm.
um, if our most basic needs are not being met, like we're not eating enough, we're not sleeping
Yeah.
enough, we feel like a shell of a person, then offering for me to go out with a friend for coffee, that's going to be higher up on the hierarchy. But I'm not even going to
So
have
true.
bandwidth to go do
Right.
something fun or go to the spa when my
Mhm.
basic needs have not been met. So I think husbands can do so well with validation, encouragement, asking those open ended questions that are gentle, but also just if you don't know what else to do, offering to make her some eggs and toast or like make her a quick meal, take the baby so she can eat,
Yes.
right? Like it's just these
Absolutely.
little things. And I mean, even like with families of multiple children, most moms, the family is done eating before she gets to sit down because she's constantly, getting things for people and cutting the food for the toddler or picking stuff up off the floor.
Yeah.
And so I think if a mom is struggling, even just the husband saying, "You sit down, I'll handle it." It's just those basic things. Or tomorrow morning, you sleep in, I'll get up early with the kids.
Right.
Those very basic things can go a long way. And a lot
So
of
good.
therapists will say when they want to help postpartum moms, that sleep is like the number one thing. So we can't even really get very far in therapy if mom is not getting any rest. And so
Mhm.
even if like I know for myself, one of my babies didn't take a bottle. So it's like I can't sleep through the night. I'm the primary breastfeeding person.
Wow.
But what you can do is you feed the baby and then hand him or her off and let dad do the burping and the diaper changing and the whatever else. Even if it's just for one feeding. Maybe you
Yes.
can't do that all night, but even if we can just divide up the night and dad does 4 hours and mom does 4 hours,
So
or
true.
some sort of, this is kind of what we work out inside of my program, but we just have to find a way for mom to even just get a little bit of relief when it
Yes.
comes to those very basic needs. That's a
So
great
so
place
good.
to start.
Oh,
Hmm.
absolutely. And to to piggyback on that with single moms too, of
Mm, yeah.
encouraging your local community, your church to uh, be doing some of that for these single moms when they're exhausted and overwhelmed and they don't have a husband. That's
Mhm,
I think would be so helpful and key as well,
mhm.
to their success and just feeling encouraged in this as they've chosen life. Um,
Yeah.
so, and with that, the church itself, do you feel pastors are addressing this well? What would you say to pastors about this issue and how they can better support women in the church as they're maybe facing postpartum? Maybe they are single moms, all of these things that are dealing with postpartum. What would you say to them that would help them in speaking to their congregations or even individual groups, I guess, about it?
Mhm. I would say, I mean, there's a couple things that come to mind. I really think making sure that women feel, there was a study recently that, or a survey recently that was done where women said that not feeling like their mental and emotional well-being was being addressed from the pulpit, that was probably one of the hardest things for them about church. And so I
Mm,
think part of being able to do that is having a healthy understanding of how God designed us, that we are a
hmm.
body, a soul, and a spirit. So if
That's
someone
good.
is dealing with something like anxiety or depression, there can absolutely be spiritual components to that. But I will say, telling someone you just need to choose joy
Yeah.
is not doing them any favors,
Yes.
because if it was that simple, would they still be struggling?
Yeah.
It's more complex than that.
Yes.
And I think so part of it, honestly, as leaders in church and pastors, we have to become more educated in understanding, okay, some of these, things like anxiety and depression can have a spiritual root, but there can also be um, wounds, lies that we're believing. Trauma is a big, I know that's becoming a buzzword, but actually
Right.
it does impact the soul.
Absolutely.
And there can be things going on in the body. So um, if we are dehydrated, if our minerals are depleted, if we're nutrient depleted, there's a lot of things that can go on in the body that can actually factor into that. And so I think when we approach someone, we just have to have this understanding that it's like a holistic person, that
Yes.
the solution may be multifaceted. That would be one thing I would say. But the other thing that was mentioned in this survey was that moms most desire like a type of community within church. And
So good.
so it doesn't have to look like a fancy moms group. I mean,
Right.
MOPS International,
They're
or I
awesome.
think it's called MomCo now,
Mhm.
um, host a local chapter of that. And they have a lot of resources now where I think it's just very done for you. Like
Yes.
if you have someone who's willing to lead it,
Yes.
it's not like recreating the wheel anymore.
So true.
Um, or if your church doesn't have something like that, encouraging and in giving permission to the moms to find a group like that in the area would also be another thing, because we are all one body. We
Yes.
may have different church congregations, but we're all one body in Christ.
So true.
But developing some type of community, I think, is important. And then I would say, looking for who in your congregation has kind of some of those pastoral giftings. They don't need to
Yes.
be on staff, they don't need to be a paid person, but are there some women that they're the ones that are going to see and notice the ones that are struggling and encouraging them that this is a ministry, to look for the
Absolutely.
ones that need support
Mhm.
and reach out to them and check on them or bring them a meal or what have you. And the last thing I'll say, well, two more things came to mind. So one is, when I was struggling as a new mom, I had a friend who was, her children were all in school. And she said, I will come once a week for 2 hours and watch your baby. And you
That's
don't have to
amazing.
talk with me. We don't have to visit, catch up. You don't owe me anything. I'm just going to come help you, because
So
I
cool.
remember how hard that was when my four were little. So she came and did that for, I don't know, it was a while. I want to say it was at least a year. She was a friend of mine. So there was
Yes.
kind of that relational connectedness. But I think even just encouraging women in your church community to look out for one another like that. And I've
So
always,
good.
I have a 3-year-old old now at home, but I've always thought when my children are all in school someday, I want to pay that forward.
So
I
true.
can't turn around in my own season of having littles and help someone else that way. But someday when I'm farther along, that's something that I want to do. And so I think sometimes even just, you know, in a church community, like reminding women in our community, like, hey, remember what that was like?
Right?
Like,
Yes. Sure.
maybe we can do something to support. And it could be a variety of things.
Sure.
Dropping somebody a meal, bringing them coffee. Honestly, sometimes it's just a text or a,
Hmm.
hey, how are you really doing?
And allowing them to
And
speak. Yeah. On that. How
yes.
are they doing? Yeah. No matter how that
Yeah.
looks,
And
for
the last
sure.
thing I would say is, the church that we're a part of, there are some mamas that had some rough postpartum seasons in the leadership there, and they said, we'll create a scholarship so that if we have someone in our church that is really struggling and wants to be a part of your program, we will help pay for part of it
That's
if
amazing.
they can't afford it. And so honestly, I think, not every situation can do that, and I know finances are kind of a complicated topic,
Right.
but that is honestly a way that, or even, like, yes, the church can do that, the actual organization. But honestly, like as a community within a church, if we see a mom that's struggling,
Yes.
we could come together and gift $20 or $25
Yes.
and put something together for her so she can get that support, whether that's babysitting or getting in to see a counselor or doing a program like mine. There's just so many ways to solve these things. It just takes kind of out of the box thinking.
It's amazing. I am so appreciative of you and just the depth of knowledge, what you're bringing to the table. I know that there are women listening right now who are like, "Thank you," because there is such a need for this conversation. And so
Mm-hmm.
really with the the program that you have, so you have a mentorship program. Do you want to just kind of share about that for women that are facing postpartum or just want to learn more about it?
Yeah. So, what I've done is through my journey with my own postpartum season, and then as I was preparing to have my second, I thought, okay, what are the most important things that need to be addressed in order to have a better experience the next time around? And that is how I developed the peace method, which is my signature approach to the postpartum season, with like, here are the foundational things that are going to make for a more peaceful, enjoyable postpartum season. And so briefly, the categories of the peace method are P, which stands for practical needs and support system. So we're talking nutrition, lifestyle, sleep, stress, nutrients being depleted, and how do we replenish those, and developing a support system. And then E stands for emotional wellness. So we're looking at things like postpartum depression and anxiety, learning to lead our thoughts, developing empowering belief systems based on the truth of scripture, um, knowing how to navigate the big emotions.
Yes.
And then the A stands for abundance in God's presence. And so this is where we really connect with the power of the gospel to free us from things like fear and shame and
So
um,
beautiful.
the pressure to perform.
Mhm.
And then C stands for confidence, which you mentioned confidence in your journey. It's a big
Yes.
one,
Huge.
but learning how to develop godly confidence in who God has designed us as a unique mom. So instead of being like tossed about by all of the cultural expectations of mothers and how we're supposed to do it and everything, you should tick all these boxes. It's okay, who has God designed me to be a mom, and how can I show up as that woman for my family, and what does that look like? And then the last letter, E, stands for expectations that are life-giving,
Hmm.
because we unknowingly have a lot of expectations of
So
ourselves,
true.
expectations of motherhood, expectations of our
Mhm.
children, and inevitably there's some disappointment that we have to work through, because that's part of being human, right? But there's a biblical way to reframe those expectations where we discover, okay, what's most important to me in this scenario, and how can I experience peace and joy even when my circumstances haven't changed at all, because that peace and joy are promised to us by God as a fruit of the Holy Spirit. But it really is something, it's a unique journey to learn how to access that in that postpartum
Yes.
season. And so the mentorship is basically a small group of like-minded women that we meet once a week on Zoom for 8 weeks. And then we walk through the Peace Method curriculum that is all online, easy to access audio sessions you listen to, because I put this program together when I was postpartum myself. And I knew, like, moms are busy, but there is some basic information that would be helpful. But what's the
Definitely.
easiest way to get that to her? She can listen to it while she's on the go, feeding the baby, driving for pickup, school pickup. So they do the working through the program on their own time. Then we meet once a week as a group and apply that information to their unique circumstance. And then there is opportunity to build community, to ask questions, to encourage one another. And I love watching women learn from each other and grow together. And the
Beautiful.
transformation, what God does in those 8 weeks, is really remarkable. And it's not just for women that are struggling. Yes, it's my top recommendation for someone who's struggling. This is what I would
Absolutely.
recommend.
Yeah.
But I feel like, women, I feel like God designed postpartum to not be this miserable thing that we just have to survive. I feel
Yes.
like it's actually uniquely designed to springboard us into who we're called to be. It's it's an
Yeah.
opportunity
Amen.
to grow in your identity, to grow in your relationship with God, to learn
Yeah.
how to be aware. What are my needs? How do I actually create a life that is supportive, not just of taking care of my children, but taking care of myself, in a way that's aligned with scripture and all of those things. And there's a lot of voices out there, but it's like, how does the gospel apply to this season of life?
Yeah.
And so I think that there is opportunity for women who maybe they say they're doing fine, they don't have postpartum depression or anxiety, but they will get so much out of this program, because
That's awesome.
if you've had a baby, you are postpartum. And so,
Yes.
and you're postpartum for
Yes.
years. And so there's so much
Yes.
goodness to grow in and learn. And it's an opportunity that I encourage women to take advantage of.
Wonderful. No, I'm excited for this. And you guys, if you are wanting to learn more, get resources to help women in your community, or maybe you're facing postpartum, you guys can find Stefanie on Instagram at Stefanie Overstreet. And she also just has the coolest reels on there and just really encouraging stuff. Maybe you're just like, I don't have time for a whole program, but you just want to look even at the reels. I just felt like they were so encouraging, things I would have loved to see as a postpartum mom. So thank you for being with us today, Stefanie, on Love Makes a Way. You are very inspirational. We're just honored to have you here.
Oh, thank you for having me. This is just so much fun. I love this topic. I could talk about it for forever.
I love it. Amazing. All right, you guys, thank you for listening, and we look forward to seeing you all next time. Thank you for listening to Love Makes a Way. If you would like to support Life Options Network, you can go to lifeoptionsnetwork.org/donate. I am so glad you were with us today.